The transport shuttle, a rusted coffin labeled Sovereign Voyager, shrieked as it tore through the upper thermosphere of Oros Theta. Inside the economy hold, Elias Thorne pressed his temple against the vibrating, synthetic pain. The void of space was being swallowed by a violent, bruised violet sky, illuminated by the gaseous glow of the giant planet looming above them. Elias was 34 years old, and according to his bank account, he was worth less than the recycled oxygen he was currently inhaling. On Earth, he had been a cortex technician, a man who navigated the delicate labyrinths of neural networks. Then came the gambling debts, a divorce that felt like a surgical extraction of his soul, and a pile of legal notices that could fill a stadium. Sovereign Dynamics hadn't offered him a job. They had offered him a disappearing act. 2 minutes to touchdown, a mechanical voice droned over the intercom. Please secure all loose items. Welcome to your new life of productivity. Productivity, Elias muttered, his voice raspy from 20 hours of stasis sleep. Right. I'm just here to turn some wrenches and avoid being kneecapped by a loan shark named Tony. The shuttle slammed onto the landing pad with enough force to make his teeth ache. When the airlock finally hissed open, the air that rushed in smelled of ozone, crushed orchids, and something metallic that tasted like a battery on his tongue. Elias grabbed his duffel bag and his heavy Neurolinker case, stepping out onto a sidewalk that hummed with a low-frequency vibration. He followed the digital nav points on his wrist unit. He had been assigned to Residential Unit 9E, commonly known by the locals as the Gilded Hive. It was a massive bioresin spire carved directly into the side of a luminescent cliff. It looked like a fungal growth made of obsidian and neon. As he approached the main entrance, Elias noticed something peculiar. The lobby was a sprawling atrium filled with floating vegetation and pools of liquid light, and it was full of women, not just human women, though he saw none of those, but a kaleidoscopic array of alien species. To his left, a towering figure with skin like polished coal and silver markings stood nearly 7 feet tall, checking a digital slate. To his right, a group of smaller, delicate beings with 4 arms each were laughing, their voices sounding like wind chimes caught in a gale. Elias stopped in his tracks, clutching his duffel bag like a shield. He checked his datapad. Unit 9E, Sector 9. This was the place. He walked toward the central concierge desk, which was currently unmanned. "Excuse me?" Elias called out. His voice seemed to trigger a localized vacuum of silence. The conversation in the atrium died instantly. 40 pairs of eyes, some with vertical slits, some solid obsidian, some glowing with internal fire, turned to look at him. Elias felt a cold sweat prickle the back of his neck. He was used to being invisible. Now he felt like a lone spark in a room full of gasoline. "Is that a male?" one of the 4-armed women whispered, her lower hands clutching a drink while her upper hands pointed at him. "Look at the dermal structure," another murmured. "So soft. No scales. No chitin. How does it protect its internal organs?" "It looks like a defective worker unit," a voice boomed from the back. The crowd parted as the 7-foot-tall warrior stepped forward. Her name tag, etched in holographic script, read Braca. She loomed over Elias, her shadow swallowing him whole. She leaned down, sniffing the air near his neck. "You smell of earth dust and desperation, little human?" Braca said, her voice a deep, gravelly bass. "Why are you in the hive? Did you get lost on your way to the labor camps?" "I'm the new Cortex Tech," Elias said, trying to find a spine he thought he'd lost in the divorce. "Elias Thorne. I'm assigned to maintenance for this block. Sovereign Dynamics sent me." At the mention of the corporation, the atmosphere shifted from curiosity to a sharp, jagged hostility. Braca crossed her massive arms. "A company man," she spat. "They usually send drones. Why send a biological unit this time? Are they running low on silicon?" "I'm just here for the pipes and the wires," Elias said, taking a step back. "I don't care about the politics. I just want my bunk and a meal that doesn't taste like cardboard." "There are no bunks for you here, Elias Thorne," a new voice interrupted. The crowd fell silent again, but this time it was a silence born of respect. A woman walked out of the lift tube. She was humanoid, but her skin was the color of an opal, shifting with underlying hues of blue and pink as she moved. Her hair was a cascade of silver filaments that seemed to ignore gravity, floating gently around her head. Her eyes were solid black, but a nebula of gold light swirled within them. "I am Vespera Nix," she said. She didn't look at Elias like he was a curiosity or a threat. She looked at him like he was a problem that needed to be solved. "I handled the disputes for this unit. You are in room 4B. 4B, Elias repeated, nodding. "Right. Thanks. I'll just head up there then." "A word of advice, technician," Vespera said as he passed her. Her voice was cool like mountain water. "The walls in the hive are thin. We value our privacy. Do not go looking for things that are not broken. Oros Theta is a beautiful world, but it has a way of swallowing people who ask too many questions." Elias didn't answer. He hurried toward the lift tube, his heart hammering against his ribs. As the doors closed, he caught a glimpse of the women in the lobby. They were still watching him, their expressions a mix of pity and suspicion. "Great," Elias whispered to the empty lift. "I moved to a new planet to get away from my problems, and I've landed in the middle of an intergalactic sorority house that hates my employer. Fantastic. Just another Tuesday in the life of Elias Thorne." Room 4B was a gray, windowless box that smelled of industrial disinfectant and old dampness. It contained a memory foam slab that felt like sleeping on a bag of flour, a tiny kitchenette that produced 3 varieties of lukewarm sludge, and a single flickering light strip that buzzed at a frequency designed to induce migraines. It was the most beautiful place Elias had ever seen, because it was quiet, or it was supposed to be. He dropped his duffel bag on the floor and sat on the edge of the bed, burying his face in his hands. The silence of the room was a lie. Through the bioresin walls, he could hear the rhythmic thrum of the building's heart, the massive geothermal turbines deep in the cliffside. But he could also hear his neighbors. To his left in room 4A, a soft, melodic humming drifted through the wall. It was Vespera. To his right in 4C, there was the sound of heavy weights hitting the floor and a series of guttural grunts that could only be Braca. Elias sighed and reached for his datapad. He needed to check his first work order. Sovereign Dynamics, Environmental Calibration, Sector 9, Block E. He scrolled through the technical specs. The building's ventilation system was a mess. The sensors were throwing erratic readings, reporting massive spikes in empathic resonance. "What the hell is empathic resonance?" Elias muttered. On Earth, sensors tracked CO2, temperature, and humidity. Here, the corporation seemed interested in how the tenants felt. He stood up, grabbing his Neuralinker. He was an engineer. If there was a glitch, he had to find the source. He walked to the corner of the room where the main intake vent was located. He pulled the cover off, revealing a tangle of fiber optic cables and pulsing biotubes. He frowned. Taped to the side of the main processor was a small black device no larger than a thumb drive. It wasn't part of the standard Sovereign kit. It was humming, a faint golden light pulsing from its core. Elias reached out to touch it, but a sharp, localized bang on his wall made him jump. "I told you to be quiet, technician." Vespera's voice rang through the wall, sounding surprisingly clear. "I'm just doing my job," Elias shouted back. "The vent is making a noise." "The vent is fine," she replied, her voice dropping to a low, intense whisper. "Leave it alone, Elias. For your own sake." Elias stared at the wall. The humming from the black device stopped. He pulled his hand back, his heart racing. He decided for the first time in his life to follow instructions. He put the vent cover back on and decided to get some air. He stepped out into the hallway. The lights were flickering again, a stuttering strobe that made the shadows dance. As he passed room 4A, the door was slightly ajar. Elias stopped. He knew he should keep walking. He knew he should mind his own business. But through the crack in the door, he saw something that froze the blood in his veins. Vespera was sitting on a floating cushion in the center of her room. Her tunic was pulled down from one shoulder. On her pale, opalescent skin, there was a jagged, ugly wound on her collarbone. It looked like a crack in porcelain. But instead of blood, a brilliant liquid gold light was leaking out. It pooled on her skin, illuminating the room with a warm, terrifying radiance. She was holding a small piece of cloth to the wound, her face contorted in a silent scream of agony. The gold light seemed to be pulsing in time with the buzz of the building's ventilation system. Elias gasped, his hand slipping on the doorframe. The sound was like a thunderclap in the quiet hallway. Vespera's head snapped toward the door. Her solid black eyes flared with a violent, blinding violet light. The air in the hallway suddenly felt heavy, like he was standing at the bottom of an ocean. A wave of raw, unadulterated grief washed over him, a pain so sharp it made his eyes water. It wasn't his grief, but he felt it as if it were his own. "Out!" she hissed, and the word felt like a physical blow to his chest. Ilias didn't wait. He turned and sprinted toward the lift tube, his boots thudding on the bioresin floor. He didn't stop until he reached the lobby. The atrium was empty now, save for a single janitorial drone hovering near the pools of light. Elias leaned against a pillar, gasping for air. His skin felt like it was vibrating. "What the hell is this place?" he whispered to the empty room. He looked down at his neurolinker. The device's screen was flickering, displaying a message he hadn't seen before. Empathic overload detected, initiating shielding protocols. Elias Thorne had moved to Oros Theta to pay off his debts and find some peace. But as he looked up at the spiraling, neon-lit heights of the Gilded Hive, he realized he had just traded his creditors for something much more dangerous. He wasn't just fixing pipes. He was a technician in a house of mirrors, and the people living next door weren't just neighbors. They were a secret that Sovereign Dynamics was willing to kill for. He pulled out his data pad and began a message to his sister on Earth. "Hey Sarah, I made it. The planet is colorful. The neighbors are interesting. I think I might have made a mistake. Tell Mom I love her." He deleted the message. He couldn't send it. Not yet. He had to know what was in those vents. "Elias!" A voice rumbled behind him. He spun around. It was Braca. She was holding two large containers of what looked like glowing blue soup. She looked at his pale face and his trembling hands. "You look like you've seen a ghost, little human," she said, thrusting one of the containers toward him. "Eat this. It's Vorg leaf stew. It'll settle your nerves or melt your stomach. Either way, you'll stop shaking." "Thanks," Elias said, taking the warm container. "Don't thank me," Braca grunted. "I just don't want a corpse in the hallway. It's bad for the property value. And Elias?" "Yeah? Stay away from the doors on the 4th floor at night. Some things aren't meant for human eyes." She turned and walked away, her heavy footsteps echoing in the silence. Elias looked down at the glowing soup. He took a sip. It tasted like cinnamon and lightning. He was 34 years old, 40 light years from home, and for the first time in his life, Elias Thorne wasn't thinking about his debts. He was thinking about a woman who bled sunshine and a corporation that was listening to the sound of her pain. He walked back to the lift. He had a job to do. The ventilation shafts of the Gilded Hive were not built for human anatomy. They were narrow, bioluminescent tunnels designed for the slender, multi-jointed maintenance drones that Sovereign Dynamics usually deployed. Elias Thorne, however, was currently wedge climbing between a cooling pipe and a fiber optic bundle, his knees barking in protest every time he shifted his weight. "You are breathing too loud, human," a voice crackled through his earpiece. It was Vespera. She had apparently decided that since Elias had seen her leak, she might as well keep a psychic leash on him. "I am breathing because my lungs require oxygen, Vespera," Elias grunted, wiping a smear of biogrease from his forehead. And this crawl space was clearly designed by someone who hated shoulders. "I feel like a sardine in a pressurized can." "A sardine? Never mind." Earth reference. Primitive and salty. Elias adjusted his headlamp. He was in the crawl space between the 4th and 5th floors, tracing the data line he had found in his own room. He wasn't supposed to be here. His official work order for the day was to recalibrate the thermal regulators in the basement. But Elias had never been good at following a script when the plot didn't make sense. He reached a junction where 4 air ducts converged. There, tucked behind a heavy lead-shielded junction box, sat another one of the black devices. This one was larger, wired directly into the building's neural mesh. It hummed with a predatory frequency, a sound that felt like it was trying to vibrate the memories right out of his head. "Found another one," Elias whispered. "It's a tap, Vespera. But it's not just listening. It's harvesting." "Harvesting what?" Her voice came back, thinner now, as if the distance or the shielding was dampening her resonance. Frequency, the specific delta waves associated with emotional distress. It's like a psychic parasite. Sovereign isn't just monitoring the hive, they're using it as a crop. Suddenly, a rhythmic scuffling sound echoed from the duct to his right. Elias froze, dousing his headlamp. In the oppressive violet gloom, he saw a shape approaching. It was too large for a drone. "Who's there?" Elias called out, his hand instinctively reaching for the heavy wrench at his belt. A pair of glowing orange eyes blinked in the dark. Then another pair right below them. "Check it. The gearhead is actually crawling the pipes." A melodic, chirping voice said. A figure emerged into the junction. It was Quill, the four-armed artist Elias had seen in the lobby. She was wearing a grease-stained jumpsuit that looked like it had been salvaged from a scrapyard, and her four hands were busy carrying a tray of glowing components. "Quill," Elias relaxed, though only slightly. "What are you doing in the vents?" "The same thing as you, probably," Quill said, her upper hands deftly slotting a piece of tech into the wall, while her lower hands offered him a small dried fruit. "Trying to keep the lights on without the suits noticing. You're the new guy, right? The soft target from Earth?" Elias took the fruit. "Soft target? Is that what they're calling me?" "Pretty much," Quill giggled, a sound like glass beads falling on silk. "Braca thinks you're a spy. Nix thinks you're a biological anomaly. Me? I think you're just another poor sap who signed a contract with the devil and realized the fine print was written in blood." "I'm an engineer, Quill. I fix things." "You can't fix a trap while you're standing in the middle of it, Elias," she said, her expression turning uncharacteristically serious. All four of her eyes focused on him. "Sovereign Dynamics didn't put us here because they're charitable. This block? It's a laboratory. They call us the surplus, but we're more like the fuel. We give them the energy they can't synthesize." "Vespera showed me," Elias said quietly. "The gold light." Quill's lower hands twitched. "That's the nectar, gearhead. Pure, concentrated empathy. The Xylari are the rarest. Most of us just produce a low-level hum. But she's a goddamn sun. If they break her, they can power a whole sector. That's why the taps are everywhere. They're waiting for her to pop." Elias felt a cold knot of dread tighten in his stomach. "Why don't you leave? If you know what they're doing, why stay in the hive?" Quill laughed, but it was a jagged, hollow sound. "And go where? To the labor camps in the deep freeze? To the vacuum of the belt? Sovereign owns the air on Oros Theta. They own the water. They own the dirt. This building is the only place where the sensors don't report us for breathing the wrong way. It's a cage, yeah, but at least we have each other in here. On the outside, we're just scrap." She reached out with her third hand and patted Elias's cheek. "Don't get too close to the wires, Earthboy. You might get a shock you can't walk away from." With a wink, Quill disappeared back into the darkness of the duct, moving with a fluid grace that Elias couldn't hope to match. Elias sat in the silence for a long time, the black tap humming beside him. He pulled out his neurolinker and plugged it into the device. The data stream was a mess of encrypted protocols, but one word kept appearing in the metadata: compliance. His comms unit buzzed. It was a high-priority ping from the regional headquarters. "Miller," the voice of his supervisor, Mr. Vance, barked. "Why is your signal stationary in the Sector 9 shafts? You were assigned to the geothermal cooling units." Elias took a breath, his heart racing. "The thermal sensors were throwing ghost readings, sir. I'm tracing a potential leak in the neural mesh, just making sure the building doesn't flatline on us." "Keep your head down and do the job you were paid for, Miller," Vance said, his voice dripping with corporate frost. "We didn't bring you all the way to Oros Theta to be a hero. We brought you here to be a cog. Don't make me replace you. Cogs are cheap." The line went dead. Elias looked at the black device. He had a choice. He could rip it out, which would trigger an alarm and likely lead to his immediate termination of contract. Or he could do what he'd done for the last 10 years. Survive. He closed his eyes, thinking of the liquid gold leaking from Vespera's skin. He thought of Quill, crawling through the dark with 4 hands and a heart full of scavenged hope. "I'm not a cog," Elias whispered to the dark. He didn't rip the device out. Instead, he opened his neurolinker and began to write a subroutine, a ghost program that would mirror the data stream. If Sovereign was harvesting the women of the Gilded Hive, Elias was going to make sure he had a copy of the receipt. The invitation didn't come in the form of a card or a digital ping. It came in the form of Braca kicking his door open at 7 in the evening. "Move it, little human," the obsidian warrior grunted, her massive frame filling the doorway. "It is the night of the first moon. We are eating in the common room. You are required." Elias, who had been halfway through a dinner of synthetic beef-scented paste, looked up in surprise. "Required? Is this a mandatory building meeting?" "It is a feast," Braca said, grabbing him by the collar of his jumpsuit and hoisting him to his feet like he weighed no more than a bag of feathers. "We do not eat alone on the first moon. It is bad for the resonance. Besides, Quill says you look like a twig that is about to snap. You need biomass." "I have biomass," Elias protested, waving his tube of paste. "It's 40% fortified." Braca made a sound that could have been a laugh or a volcanic eruption. "That is not food. That is a crime against biology. Now walk, or I will carry you over my shoulder like a prize kill." Elias chose to walk. The common room at the end of the fourth-floor corridor had been transformed. The harsh, flickering biostrips had been dimmed, replaced by hundreds of small, floating spheres of soft amber light. The furniture had been pushed to the walls and the floor was covered in cushions and blankets woven from bioluminescent silk. In the center of the room, a large circular table floated 6 inches off the ground, laden with dishes that defied Elias's understanding of culinary science. There were fruits that shimmered like opals, steaming bowls of purple broth, and platters of meat that smelled of ginger and wood smoke. 20 women were already there, their voices a low, rhythmic hum that seemed to vibrate in Elias's chest. As he entered, the conversation shifted, but it wasn't the hostile silence of the lobby. It was curious. "The gearhead arrives," Quill shouted, waving all 4 arms from her spot near the broth. "Sit, Elias. Try the Xylari wine. It tastes like a sunset and feels like a secret." Elias sat cross-legged on a cushion between Quill and Nix, the aquatic scholar. He felt horribly out of place in his dirty corporate jumpsuit, surrounded by these vibrant, alien beings. Vespera was sitting directly across from him. She was wearing a robe of shifting blue silk that seemed to flow like water. She looked regal, distant, and utterly exhausted. Her black eyes met his for a second, and Elias felt a sudden, sharp spike of warmth in his mind, a greeting that didn't use words. "We have a guest," Vesper said, her voice quieting the room. "Elias Thorn of Earth. He is the first of his kind to reside in the hive. Some of you think he is a spy. Some think he is a defect. I'm right here, you know," Elias muttered. Vespera ignored him, a small ghost of a smile touching her lips. "But he is a resident of Block A17 now. And in this house, we do not let our neighbors starve in the dark. Tonight, we share the residence. We choose to be a family because the corporation would rather we be a statistics." The word choice hung in the air, heavy and significant. As the meal began, Elias found himself overwhelmed. He was handed a cup of the purple wine. It was sweet, cold, and as it hit his stomach, he felt a strange sensation of clarity. The noise of his own anxiety, the constant mental tally of his debts and failures, started to fade. "So, Elias," Nick said, her gills fluttering gently, "tell us of Earth. Is it true your planet is covered in a single vast ocean of salt water?" "Mostly," Elias said, taking a bite of a fruit that tasted like a strawberry dipped in starlight. "But it's crowded. Too many people. Too little space. Everyone is trying to get somewhere else." "Like you?" Quill asked, leaning in. "You came 40 light years to fix pipes. That's a long walk for a paycheck." "I didn't come for the paycheck," Elias admitted, the wine making him more honest than he intended to be. "I came because I didn't have anywhere else to go. I made a mess of things back home. I thought if I went far enough away, I could leave the mess behind." "You cannot outrun your own resonance, human," Braca said, tearing into a piece of meat with her teeth. "A wounded animal carries its scent wherever it wanders." "Cheerful," Elias noted dryly. "But you can choose a new pack," Vespera said softly. The room grew quiet. The amber light seemed to pulse in time with the collective heartbeat of the group. Elias looked around the circle. He saw the scars on Braca's arms, the weary wisdom in Nix's eyes, the frantic creative energy in Quill's movements. He realized that they were all refugees, not just from their planets, but from the versions of themselves that the universe had tried to break. "Why are you all women?" Elias asked, the question he had been burning to ask since he arrived. Nyx sighed, her translucent skin turning a soft shade of blue. "Because sovereign dynamics believes that female biological units of our species are more empathically conductive. They think we are easier to harvest. They think we are less likely to form a resistance. They want our light, but they do not want our fire." "They're wrong," Elias said, the anger surprising even him. "Yes," Vespera said, her nebula eyes glowing. "They are. But fire requires oxygen, Elias. It requires space to burn." As the night wore on, the wine and the food did something to Elias he hadn't expected. He started to feel the resonance they kept talking about. It wasn't mind reading, it was a sense of shared space. He felt the weight of their collective history, a vast tapestry of loss and survival. And for the first time in 3 years, he didn't feel like a debt number. He felt like a person. He was laughing at a joke Quill made about the evolutionary redundancy of human toes when the lights flickered. It wasn't a standard power sag. The amber spheres died instantly, replaced by the harsh, strobing red of the building's emergency system. A low, mourning siren began to wail from the walls. "Compliance check," Nyx whispered, her face draining of color. "In the middle of the night?" Elias asked, scrambling to his feet. "They do it to keep us off balance," Braca said, her hand reaching for the heavy metal bar she kept tucked behind a cushion. "They want to see how we react when we are startled." The door to the common room hissed open. 4 corporate troopers in matte black armor stepped inside, their stun batons crackling with blue electricity. Behind them stood a man in a pristine white lab coat, holding a device that looked like a jagged tuning fork. "Unsanctioned gathering detected," the technician said, his voice a flat, mechanical monotone. "Sector 9, Block E is currently under a randomized biological audit. All residents will return to their units for individual scanning." "We are having a meal," Vesper said, stepping forward. Her silver hair was standing on end, charged with a static field. "The Housing Act of 2290 protects communal dining rights." "The Housing Act has been suspended for this sector," the technician said, not looking up from his datapad. "There have been reports of unauthorized energy signatures. We are here to stabilize the grid." He pointed the tuning fork at Vespera. The device emitted a high-pitched, agonizing whine. Vespera gasped, her knees buckling. The golden light began to leak from her shoulder, brighter and more frantic than before. "Stop it!" Elias shouted, stepping between Vespera and the technician. "You're overloading her! I'm a Cortex tech. I know the specs on that scanner. You've got the gain set to maximum. You're going to cause a neural hemorrhage." The troopers raised their batons. "Step aside, Miller," the lead trooper barked through his helmet. "This is corporate business. Don't make us file a liability report on your corpse." Elias looked at the troopers, their armor gleaming in the red light. He looked at the technician, who was watching Vespera's pain with the clinical detachment of a man observing a chemical reaction. Then he looked at Vespera, who was trembling on the floor, her hand reaching out for him. Elias Thorne had spent his whole life avoiding trouble. He had spent 10 years being a cog. He had moved to a new planet to find a quiet life. "I said stop it," Elias said, his voice low and dangerous. He didn't use a weapon. He didn't have one. Instead, he reached into his pocket and pulled out his neurolinker. With a flick of his thumb, he activated the ghost program he had written in the vents. The earpieces of the 4 troopers suddenly erupted in a burst of static, the sound of their own surveillance taps being fed back into their systems at 500 decibels. They staggered, clutching their helmets, the stun batons clattering to the floor. The technician's tuning fork sparked and died, the screen turning a solid, mocking red. "What did you do?" the technician screamed, his hands shaking. "I fixed the glitch," Elias said, his heart pounding against his ribs like a trapped bird. In the chaos, Braca moved. She was a blur of gray muscle, a storm of obsidian. Within 5 seconds, the 4 troopers were disarmed and pinned against the wall. The silence that followed was absolute. Vespera looked up at Elias, her eyes wide, the gold light slowly receding. "You shouldn't have done that," she whispered. "They will kill you now." "Maybe," Elias said, helping her to her feet. His hands were shaking, but he didn't pull away. But I'm tired of being a cog, Vespera, and I'm tired of eating alone. He looked around the room at the 20 women who were watching him. He saw the fear in their eyes, but he also saw something else. He saw a choice. They're coming back, Nyx said, her gills fluttering frantically. With more men, with real guns. Then we won't be here, Elias said. He looked at the black folder in his mind. The map of the vents, the secrets of the crawl spaces. I know how the pipes work in this building. I know where the blind spots are. He reached out and took Vespera's hand. Her skin was cool, but her grip was like iron. I moved to a new planet for work, Elias thought, a grim smile touching his lips. And I think I just quit my job. Where are we going? Quill asked, her 4 hands busy gathering her light paintings. To the dark, Elias said. The only place where they can't see us feel. As they began to move toward the maintenance shafts, Elias felt a sudden, profound sense of peace. He was a fugitive. He was 40 light years from home. He was in a building full of alien women who were about to start a war. He had never felt more like he belonged. The darkness of the maintenance shafts was absolute, save for the rhythmic, bioluminescent pulse of the copper-blue pipes that lined the walls. Elias Thorne could feel the heat of the women behind him, a collective radiator of frantic breathing and the sharp scent of adrenaline. He was leading them through a vertical service conduit that dropped 4 stories straight into the industrial guts of the building. On his hip, the neurolinker was chirping a soft, urgent warning. The building's internal security sensors were pinging every biological signature in the crawl space, trying to reconcile 30 individual heartbeats with a system that only expected 2 maintenance drones. Keep your heads down and your mouths shut, Elias whispered into the comms bead. We are entering the primary cooling duct for Sector 9. If the suits upstairs trigger a thermal purge, we are going to be roasted before we can say sorry. Quiet, gearhead. Braca grunted from directly behind him. She was carrying 2 of the smaller Ethel children, one tucked under each massive arm. Her obsidian skin was slick with sweat, and the silver markings on her shoulders were flickering a dim, warning red. We know the stakes. Just find us a hole to hide in before the tin cans find our scent. The tin cans Braca was referring to were the Mark IV extraction drones, spider-like machines designed to pull stubborn minerals out of rock walls, or, in this case, stubborn refugees out of ventilation shafts. Elias could hear the distant, metallic clicking of their legs echoing through the pipes. They were close. They reached a junction where the air smelled of stale water and ancient dust. Elias signaled for a halt. He leaned against a rusted bulkhead, his lungs burning. He looked back at the line of women. Nyx was helping an elderly woman whose gills were fluttering with a sickly gray pallor. Quill was hovering near the back, all 4 arms clutching scavenged data slates in jars of light paint. They looked like a defeated army, but as Elias watched them, he realized they weren't looking at the darkness. They were looking at him. The realization hit him like a physical blow. On Earth, Elias had never been responsible for anyone. He had spent 10 years navigating the corporate ladder by stepping on the rungs of plausible deniability. If a system failed, it was the manufacturer's fault. If a client's neural mesh fried, it was a pre-existing condition. He had mastered the art of being unattached. But here, in the damp dark of a foreign moon, he was the only thing standing between 30 people in a corporate firing squad. Why are you stopping, Elias? Vespera asked. She stepped forward, her opalescent skin glowing faintly, casting long, distorted shadows against the pipes. She looked exhausted. The gold light at her collarbone dimmed to a dull ember, but her eyes were still solid pools of obsidian. I'm checking the thermal cycle, Elias lied. His hands were shaking. In reality, he was terrified. He was 34 years old, and he was suddenly the patriarch of a family he hadn't asked for, in a war he wasn't qualified to fight. He felt the crushing weight of their trust, a heavy, suffocating mantle that made it hard to draw a full breath. You're thinking about the exit, aren't you? Vespera said, her voice barely a whisper. You're thinking that if you just leave us here, you can still make it to the spaceport. You can still take that settlement and go back to your quiet life. Elias looked at her. He wanted to say she was wrong. He wanted to be the hero from the vids who never doubted his path. But the truth was a jagged thing. The lawyer's folder was still etched into his mind. 10,000 credits, a clean slate, a house with a lawn. It's a lot of lives, Vespera, Elias said, his voice cracking. If I mess this up, if I take a wrong turn in these pipes, you all die. I'm just a guy who fixes toilets and neural links. I'm not a revolutionary. I'm not a savior. I'm just a scrapper who got lucky once. A scrapper who stayed, Quill chirped, crawling over the pipes to join them. She reached out with a lower hand and gripped his elbow. The suit back at the office, Vance? He called you a cog, but cogs don't bug out when things get heavy. Cogs don't bleed for people they met 3 weeks ago. You're not a cog, gearhead. You're part of the static now. And the static is what breaks the machine. Elias looked at the four-armed artist. Her eyes were bright, filled with a defiant, frantic hope. He looked at Braca, who nodded once, a slow, solemn acknowledgement of his fear. He realized then that they weren't following him because he was an expert. They were following him because he was the only one who had seen them as more than data points. He was the only one who had chosen them, and in that moment, the choice became his own. All right, Elias said, straightening his back and wiping the grime from his eyes. If we're going to be static, let's make sure we're loud. There's a decommissioned atmospheric scrubber 2 levels down. It's off the main grid, shielded by 3 meters of lead-lined concrete. Sovereign forgot it exists 40 years ago. It's not a palace, but it's a hole they can't see into. Move it! Braca hissed to the others. You heard the man. Follow the gearhead. They began the descent, a slow, agonizing crawl through the bowels of the hive. Every creak of metal, every hiss of steam felt like a death sentence. Halfway down, a hunter drone hummed past a nearby vent, its red laser grid sweeping the darkness just inches from Elias's feet. He held his breath, his heart hammering a frantic rhythm against his ribs. He felt a hand on his shoulder, Vespera's hand. Her touch was cool, but it grounded him, a tether in the void. They reached the scrubber room an hour later. It was a cavernous, echoing vault filled with the skeletons of massive turbines and the smell of ancient grease. It was cold, damp, and perfect. As the women began to settle onto the dusty floor, huddling together for warmth, Elias walked to a rusted terminal in the corner. He plugged his Neurolinker in, his fingers moving with a desperate, practiced speed. He needed to know what the suits were planning. He needed to know the cost of the stand they had just taken. He bypassed the local firewall, his mind diving into the building's primary server mesh. He bypassed the security logs and the maintenance schedules, heading straight for the encrypted core files labeled Project Compliance. He found the file he was looking for. It wasn't a blueprint for a weapon. It was a roster. Elias stared at the screen, his blood turning to ice. The list contained the names of every resident in Block A17. Next to each name was a series of values: empathic yield, threshold for despair, and something called conversion potential. He scrolled down to the bottom. There was a final entry, dated only 2 days ago. Subject, Elias Thorne. Role, Catalyst. Notes, subject's proximity to Xylari Prime, Vespera Nix, has increased her radiant output by 15%. Subject's emotional instability and debt burden make him the ideal stress vector. Initiate sector purge to finalize subject's psychological break. Elias fell back against the cold metal of the terminal, the Neurolinker clattering to the floor. They weren't just monitoring the women, they were using him. Every act of kindness he'd shown, every cup of ice he'd brought to Vespera, every hour he'd spent in the common room, it had all been calibrated. The corporation hadn't just put him in the building as a maintenance man, they had put him there as a torturer who didn't know he was holding the knife. Elias? Vespera's voice came from the darkness. What is it? What did you find? Elias didn't answer. He couldn't. He looked at the 30 women who were finally feeling safe in the dark, and he realized that the person who had brought them here was the very person the corporation had hired to break them. The family he had chosen was a trap, and he was the bait. The air in the atmospheric scrubber room was stagnant, tasting of rust and the slow decay of abandoned dreams. Elias Thorne sat in the shadows of a massive, dormant fan blade, staring at the glowing screen of his datapad. The revelation from the server mesh was a poison in his mind, a cold realization that every step he had taken toward humanity had been a step toward the corporation's endgame. He felt a presence beside him. Vespera sat down, her silver hair shimmering like moonlight in the gloom. She didn't say anything at first. She just sat there, her opalescent skin reflecting the dim blue light of the terminal. "They knew, Vespera," Elias whispered, his voice sounding like dry leaves on stone. "They knew I'd try to help. They knew I'd get close to you. They didn't hire me because I was a good tech. They hired me because I was a broken man who would latch on to the first thing that made him feel like he mattered." Vespera turned her head, her solid black eyes searching his face. "You think your heart is just a series of programmed responses, Elias? You think the way you looked at me when I was bleeding was just a variable in a sovereign equation? The data doesn't lie, Vespera. My presence increased your output. I'm a performance enhancer for your pain. Every time I care about you, you produce more for them. I am the reason they are going to burn this block. If I hadn't stayed, if I had just been a jerk who did his job and ignored you, they wouldn't have the data they need to start the purge." Vespera reached out, her cool fingers brushing the back of his hand. Elias flinched, but she didn't let go. "Sovereign dynamics can measure the light, Elias," she said, her voice a low, resonant hum. "They can measure the heat and the frequency, but they cannot measure the choice. They saw you as a stress vector. They saw me as a transmitter. They forgot that transmitters can choose what they broadcast, and stress vectors can choose what they support." "It's not that simple," Elias snapped, standing up and pacing the small circle of light. "We are sitting in a lead box in the basement of a building owned by people who see us as spare parts. They are going to pump the vents full of neural gas or just blow the floor bolts and let us drop 5 miles into the canyon. And it's my fault. I brought you here. I told you we'd be safe. You gave us a chance to fight." A voice rasped from the shadows. Braca stepped into the light, her massive obsidian frame looking even more imposing in the tight confines of the scrubber room. She was holding a heavy piece of industrial rebar she had scavenged from the machinery. "Before you arrived, gearhead, we were just waiting to die," Braca said, her orange eyes glowing with a fierce, steady light. "We lived in our little rooms, we ate our paste, and we waited for the day the suits decided we were no longer productive. We were ghosts in our own homes. Now," Braca slammed the rebar against the floor, the sound echoing like a gunshot through the vault. "Now we are a problem. Now they have to come and get us. And when they do, they are going to find out that a cornered animal doesn't care about corporate optics." Elias looked at the warrior, then at Vespera, then at the huddle of women who were now watching them from the edges of the room. He saw the fear, yes, but he also saw a jagged, desperate pride. They weren't angry at him. They were angry at the machine. "Is there a way to stop the purge?" Nix asked, her gills fluttering with a frantic blue light. "If they are using the building as a broadcast network, can we short it out?" Elias turned back to the terminal, his mind beginning to engage the problem not as a man, but as an engineer. He looked at the schematics of the hive, the complex web of neural mesh and atmospheric conduits. "The compliance wave requires a synchronized resonance," Elias said, his fingers flying across the keys. "It uses the ventilation system as a waveguide to broadcast the signal into the cerebral cortex of every biological unit on the moon. It's like a massive radio station. Vespera is the singer. The women in this room are the backup choir, and the building is the antenna." "Can we cut the antenna?" Quill asked, her 4 hands busy tinkering with a circuit board she had pulled from a nearby wall. "No," Elias said. "The antenna is the structure itself, but we can change the tune." He looked at Vespera. "The corporation wants despair, Vespera. They want fear. That's the frequency that makes the wave work. That's what makes people compliant. But if we can broadcast something else, something that doesn't fit the algorithm, the system will crash. It will feed back into the server mesh and fry the primary transmitters." "Something else?" Vesper asked. "Like what?" "Like the resonance," Elias said. "Like the feeling in that room tonight when we were eating and laughing. The feeling of being home." Vesper looked at her hands, the gold light pulsing softly under her skin. "You want me to broadcast my feelings for you? To the whole planet?" "It's the only thing loud enough to break the wave," Elias said softly. "Sovereign has spent billions mapping our pain. They haven't spent a single credit on our joy. It's a blind spot in their code. Suddenly, the floor beneath them groaned. A deep subterranean vibration rattled the turbines, sending a shower of rust and dust from the ceiling. The emergency strobes in the scrubber room shifted from red to a solid, terrifying white. "They're here," Braca hissed, raising her rebar. "The purge has started." Above them, they could hear the concussive boom of breaching charges. The suits weren't coming for a compliance check this time. They were coming to clear the board. Elias grabbed his Neurolinker and looked at Vespera. "We have to get to the primary junction on the 10th floor," he said. "That's the only place where we can hijack the broadcast relay." "It's 10 stories of troopers and drones, gearhead," Quill said, her eyes wide. "We'll be flatlined before we reach the 2nd floor." "Not if we bug out through the external service rails," Elias said. He looked at the women, his voice taking on a new, grim authority. "Braca, you lead the defense. Hold the stairwells. Use the gravity dampeners to slow them down. Quill, I need you to bypass the elevator locks. Make them think we're going down when we're actually going up." "What about me?" Vesper asked. "You're with me," Elias said. "We're going to the roof. We're going to give them a broadcast they'll never forget." As the first wave of extraction drones began to cut through the heavy doors of the scrubber room, Elias felt a strange, terrifying sense of clarity. He was no longer the man who lived in room 4B. He was no longer a debtor or a divorcee or a cog in a corporate machine. He was a man who had chosen his family, and he was ready to burn the whole damn moon down to keep them safe. "Move!" Elias roared over the sound of the screeching metal. They surged out of the scrubber room, a chaotic, brilliant blur of alien light and human desperation. As they ran through the dark, the first of the drones burst through the ceiling, its red laser eye locking onto Elias's back. Braca leaped into the air, her rebar swinging in a massive, bone-crunching arc. The drone shattered into 1,000 pieces of sparking chrome. "Go, gearhead!" Braca yelled, her voice a defiant thunder. "We'll hold the line. You just fix the damn world." Elias didn't look back. He grabbed Vesper's hand and began to climb. Behind them, the gilded hive was screaming, but in front of them, the violet sky was waiting. And for the first time in his life, Elias Thorne wasn't afraid of the fall. He was only afraid of the silence. The external service rail was a narrow rib of rusted alloy that clung to the sheer obsidian face of the cliffside like a desperate skeletal finger. 400 meters below, the canyon floor was a swirling soup of violet fog and industrial runoff. Above, the gilded hive groaned under the assault of the Sovereign Dynamics extraction teams. Elias Thorne felt the wind clawing at his jumpsuit, a cold, predatory gale that smelled of high-altitude ozone in the coming storm. "You still with me, Vespera?" Elias shouted over the roar of the wind. He was anchored to the rail by a single magnetic tether, his boots slipping on the frost-slick metal. "I am here, Elias." Her voice came through the comms bead, sounding thin and brittle. "But the noise, it is getting louder." Elias looked back. Vespera was 10 meters below him, her opalescent skin nearly translucent in the harsh moonlight of Oros Theta. The golden light at her collarbone was no longer a glow. It was a frantic, staccato pulse. She was reacting to the psychic static of the purge happening inside the building. Every scream, every spike of terror from the women below was hitting her like a physical wave. "Don't listen to them," Elias yelled, reaching down to steady the line. "Focus on the rail. Focus on my voice. We're almost at the 10th floor relay." The 10th floor was a jagged protrusion of glass and steel that housed the building's primary atmospheric and communications array. It was the brain of the hive, and right now, it was being guarded by a swarm of Mark IV extraction drones. Elias could see their red optical sensors scanning the cliffside, searching for the biosignatures that had vanished from the internal corridors. Suddenly, his comms bead crackled with the sound of static and heavy breathing. It was Braca. "Elias." "The stairwell is gone," the warrior grunted. The sound of a concussive blast echoed in the background. They used a thermobaric charge. "We're boxed in on the 6th floor. Nix is hurt. Quill is out of juice." "Braca, listen to me," Elias said, his heart dropping into his stomach. "You have to get them into the ventilation scrubbers. The lead shielding will hide your signatures for a few more minutes." "No more running, gearhead." Braca replied. Her voice was surprisingly calm, devoid of its usual gravelly bark. We've made our stand. The children are safe in the shafts, but we are holding the line. You just make sure that broadcast hits the moon. You make it loud, human. Do you hear me? Make it so loud they can't ignore us anymore. The line went dead with a sharp final click. Elias stared at the comms bead, a cold void opening up in his chest. He thought of Braca, the obsidian warrior who had treated him like a fragile toy until he proved he could fix a pipe. He thought of Quill, who had 4 hands and 0 fear. He thought of the family he had chosen, and the reality that they were currently dying to give him a few extra seconds of oxygen. Elias? Vespera called out from below. We're moving, Elias said, his voice dropping into a low, jagged rasp. No more stopping. We're going to the top. He lunged upward, his muscles screaming in protest. He stopped being a technician and started being a ghost, moving with a reckless speed that ignored the 400-meter drop. He reached the 10th floor balcony just as the first drone pivoted its head toward him. Target identified, the drone's mechanical voice droned. Deploying non-lethal deterrent. A high-frequency sonic pulse slammed into Elias, sent him reeling back toward the edge of the balcony. His vision blurred, his ears began to bleed, and for a second the violet sky seemed to tilt on its axis. Not today, you bucket of bolts, Elias snarled. He didn't use a gun. He reached into his belt and pulled out a concentrated EMP vial he had scavenged from the maintenance shop. He crushed the vial against the balcony railing. A sphere of blue electrical distortion rippled outward, shorting out the drone's optical sensors and sending it tumbling into the abyss. He grabbed Vespera's hand and hauled her over the railing, just as the balcony doors hissed open. 3 corporate troopers stepped out, their stun rifles leveled at his chest. Mr. Miller, the lead trooper said, his voice distorted by his helmet, you are significantly outside your designated work zone. Drop the technician and surrender the Xylari asset. Director Vance is still willing to honor the terms of your settlement if you comply immediately. Elias looked at the troopers. He looked at the white-clad technician standing behind them, holding the jagged tuning fork. Then he looked at Vespera, who was leaning against him, her silver hair tangled and her eyes filled with a terrifying, luminous resolve. The settlement, Elias said, a bitter laugh escaping his lips. 10,000 credits and a house with a lawn. That's the price of a soul these days, isn't it? It's more than you're worth, Scrapper, the trooper replied. Now move. Elias stepped forward, but he didn't put his hands up. He reached for his neurolinker. I've spent 34 years being a cog, Elias said. I've spent my whole life worrying about the bill, about the debt, about the quiet life. But here's the thing about cogs. Once they stop turning, the whole machine breaks. He slammed the neurolinker into the balcony's atmospheric control port. Vespera, now. Vespera didn't hesitate. She didn't wait for a command. She stepped into the center of the balcony and opened her arms. The golden light at her collarbone erupted. It wasn't a leak anymore. It was a flood. She took the psychic agony of the women on the 6th floor, the fear of the children in the shafts, and the defiant rage of Braca, and she channeled it through her own body. The air on the balcony shattered. A wave of raw, unadulterated emotion slammed into the troopers, a force so powerful it bypassed their neural shielding and hit them directly in the amygdala. They dropped their rifles, clutching their heads, screaming in a language they didn't know they spoke. The technician collapsed, his tuning fork shattering against the glass. Elias didn't wait to see if they survived. He grabbed Vespera, whose skin was now glowing with a blinding, furious white, and dragged her toward the primary relay station at the center of the floor. We're here, Elias whispered, his voice shaking. We're at the heart of the machine. The primary relay station was a cathedral of cold glass and humming server banks. At its center sat a massive rotating pillar of fiber optic cables known as the Cortex Vault. This was where the compliance was processed, where the harvested emotions were refined into the signal that would eventually enslave the moon. Elias stood before the vault, his reflection distorted in the polished black surface. He felt the hum of the machine in his marrow, a vibration of stolen lives and processed grief. I have to plug in, Elias said, looking at the interface port, but it's air-gapped. The only way to bypass the security is to provide a biological bridge. A bridge? Vesper asked, her voice sounding far away, as if she were speaking from the bottom of a deep well. I have to connect my neural linker to my own neural mesh and then to the machine, Elias explained. The system will try to overwrite my consciousness with the corporate base code. It's how they ensure the technician doesn't get any ideas. Elias, no, Vesper said, reaching for him. Your mind, it is not designed for that kind of load. You will be erased. I'm already erased, Vespera, Elias said, a sad smile touching his lips. On Earth, I'm just a bankrupt file. In this building, I'm a stress vector. But right now, in this room, I'm the guy who knows how to fix the wires. He sat down at the base of the vault. He began to attach the neural pads from his neural linker to his temples. His hands were steady, the mercobiotic needles stinging as they sank into his skin. Wait! A voice boomed from the overhead speakers. Elias froze. The holographic emitters in the room flared to life, and the image of Director Vance appeared in the center of the chamber. He looked older, his face etched with a desperate manic tension. Miller, don't be a fool, Vance said, his holographic hands gesturing toward the vault. You think you're saving them? You're just delaying the inevitable. Sovereign Dynamics is not a company. It is a fundamental law of the universe. We are the order that keeps the chaos at bay. You're a parasite, Vance, Elias said, adjusting the final lead. You're just a guy in a suit who figured out how to monetize a heartbeat. Listen to me, Vance shouted, his image flickering. The settlement is still on the table. In fact, I've doubled it. 20,000 credits. A luxury transport is waiting at the spaceport. You can leave right now. You can go back to Earth, marry someone who doesn't bleed sunshine, and live a quiet, comfortable life. Why die for a bunch of aliens who won't even remember your name in 100 years? Elias looked at the hologram. He thought of the quiet life. He thought of the house with the lawn, the silence that didn't remind him of debts, the safety of being invisible. It was everything he had ever wanted. Then he looked at Vespera. He saw the gold light pulsing in her veins, the way she looked at him with a trust that was so profound it felt like a physical weight. He thought of Quill's laughter and Bracca's steady, obsidian strength. He realized then that the quiet life was a lie. It wasn't peace. It was just a different kind of compliance. It was a life where you didn't care enough to hurt, and if you didn't care enough to hurt, you weren't really alive. You're right, Vance, Elias said, his thumb hovering over the activation switch. They probably won't remember my name, and I'll definitely be dead. But here's the thing about family. You don't do it because of the legacy. You do it because they're your neighbors, and you don't let your neighbors burn. Miller, stop! Vance screamed. Elias slammed his hand onto the switch. A bolt of pure, white-hot agony tore through his nervous system. It felt like 1,000 needles were being driven into his brain at once. His vision went white, then black, then a chaotic kaleidoscope of corporate data streams and childhood memories. He saw his mother's face, the divorce papers, the neon signs of the gambling dens, and the violet sky of Oros Theta. The cortex vault groaned, the fiber optic pillars spinning faster and faster. The black surface began to crack, revealing a core of brilliant, shimmering energy. Elias! Vesper's voice was the only thing keeping him grounded. He felt his consciousness being pulled into the machine, his memories being categorized and deleted by the corporate base code. Identity, Elias Thorne. Status, redundant. Action, overwrite. Not today, Elias gasped, his teeth clenching so hard he thought they would shatter. I'm not a cog. He forced his mind to focus on a single memory. Not a memory of Earth, or of failure, or of debt. He focused on the night of the first moon. He focused on the taste of the Xylari wine, the warmth of the amber lights, and the sound of 20 different species laughing together in a room that smelled of ginger and hope. He took that resonance, that messy, uncalibrated joy, and he threw it into the machine. The cortex vault shuddered. The corporate base code began to glitch, unable to process the frequency of genuine, unharvested empathy. The black surface shattered completely, showering the room in shards of glass. Elias fell forward, the neural leads ripping from his temples. He hit the floor, his chest heaving, his mind a shattered landscape of static and light. The holographic image of Vance distorted and vanished, replaced by a wall of scrolling red text. System error. Resonance breach. Initiating feedback loop. Vespera was there, her arms around him, pulling him away from the pulsing core. "You did it," she whispered, her tears falling onto his face, smelling of rain and ozone. "Elias, you broke the antenna." Outside, the gilded hive began to vibrate. But it wasn't the groan of destruction, it was a hum of release. The black taps in the vents began to smoke and die. The red strobe lights turned back to a soft, steady amber. On the 6th floor, the corporate troopers suddenly stopped. They lowered their rifles, their helmets flickering with the feedback of a billion unauthorized emotions. Braca stood over them, her rebar raised, but she didn't strike. She looked at the troopers and saw not enemies, but men who were suddenly, terrifyingly awake. Elias lay on the floor of the Cathedral of Glass, his hand in Vespera's. He felt a profound, exhausting lightness. His debts weren't paid. His future was a violent uncertainty. He was a fugitive on a moon that was about to go to war with the most powerful corporation in the galaxy. But as he looked up at Vespera, his eyes finally clearing of the corporate static, he knew he had made the right choice. He hadn't chosen the quiet life. He had chosen the loud one. He had chosen the family that bled sunshine and fought with kitchen utensils. "Vespera," Elias rasped, his voice barely a breath. "I am here, Elias." Did we make it loud?" Vespera looked out at the violet sky, where the planetary broadcast was currently being hijacked by the resonance of 1,000 alien women choosing to be free. "Yes, Elias," she whispered, leaning down to press her forehead against his. "It is the loudest thing in the universe." The silence that followed the collapse of the Cortex Vault was not the empty, sterile quiet Elias Thorne had spent 10 years chasing. It was a heavy, ringing stillness, the kind that settles over a battlefield after the last shell has whistled into the mud. Elias lay on the shattered glass of the cathedral floor, his lungs struggling to remember the rhythm of a normal breath. Every nerve in his body felt like it had been scraped raw with industrial sandpaper. His vision was a fractured mosaic of violet sparks and corporate error messages that refused to fade from his retinas. "Elias?" The voice was a cool anchor in the white noise of his mind. He felt Vespera's hands on his face, her touch no longer cautious or distant. She was trembling. He forced his eyes open, and for a moment he couldn't tell where she ended, and the nebula of Oros Theta began. The gold light in her skin had settled into a soft, steady thrum, like a campfire that had survived a hurricane. "I'm still here," Elias rasped. His tongue felt like a piece of dry leather. Did it stick?" Vespera looked up at the massive, shattered pillar of the vault. The fiber optic cables were dead, hanging like the shriveled vines of a ghost tree. The screens that once scrolled with the cold logic of compliance were now dark, save for a single, flickering prompt. "User override. Complete. Broadcast standing." "It's stuck," she whispered, a tear tracing a silver path through the dust on her cheek. The whole moon heard it, Elias. They didn't just hear the words. They felt the resonance. They felt what it means to be chosen. Outside the glass walls of the relay station, the capital city was a kaleidoscope of chaos. The white spires of sovereign dynamics were no longer pristine. They were being swarmed by the very people they had spent decades harvesting. The sway was broken. In the plaza below, thousands of residents, Xyleri, Obsidian Kin, Ethel, and a dozen other species, were looking at each other not as competitors for resources, but as survivors of a shared nightmare. A sudden, sharp crackle erupted from Elias's discarded comms beat. It was a mess of interference, but then a voice broke through, loud, abrasive, and gloriously alive. "Gearhead, you better be breathing, you soft-skinned lunatic." Elias let out a sound that was half laugh, half sob. "Braca? What's the sitrep?" "Foobar, human, completely foobar," the warrior roared. "The suits are bugging out. They tried to reach the landing pads, but Quill and the girls hijacked the transit rails. We've got 4 squads of armored troopers sitting in the dark, crying because they can finally feel how much of a bunch of jerks they've been. Nyx is patching up the wounded. The hive is ours, Elias. Do you hear me? The hive is ours. I hear you, Braca, Elias said, closing his eyes. Tell them. Tell them to keep the lights on. I'm coming home. But standing up felt like an impossible engineering project. Vespera helped him, her arm around his waist, acting as the structural support he lacked. As they limped toward the service elevator, they passed the body of the lead trooper Elias had faced on the balcony. The man's helmet had been removed. He wasn't a monster. He was just a man, perhaps 25 years old, his face pale and tear-streaked. He was staring at his own hands as if seeing them for the first time. What do we do with them? Vesper asked, her voice filled with a weary compassion. The ones who were just following the base code? Elias looked at the trooper. He thought of the black folder, the settlement, and the thousands of times he had looked the other way back on Earth. We give them what they didn't give us, Elias said. A choice. They can help us rebuild, or they can take the next shuttle into the void. But the debt is finished, no more cogs. They reached the ground floor just as the first sun of Oros Theta began to crest the horizon. The light was a deep, bruising crimson, bleeding into the violet sky. The gilded hive stood before them, a bruised but unbroken monument. The women of the hive were pouring out into the street, a river of color and light. Quill was the first to reach them, her forearms wrapping around Elias and Vespera in a tangle of grease-stained fabric and overwhelming gratitude. You did it, you crazy gearhead, she chirped, her eyes bright with a frantic joy. The server mesh is melting. The corporate accounts are frozen. We just bought 3 years' worth of protein paste with the credits Vance tried to hide in his offshore pocket. Protein paste? Elias groaned. Can't we at least get some real fruit? Everything in time, human, Nyx said, stepping forward. Her gills were fluttering a calm, healthy blue. She placed a hand on Elias's shoulder. You are hurt. Your neural pathways are scarred. You need stasis, rest, and a month of quiet. Elias looked at the crowd of neighbors, at the children playing in the shadow of the now silent extraction drones, and at Vespera, who was still holding his hand as if her life depended on it. He thought of the quiet he had wanted, the silence of a grave, the peace of being forgotten. I've had enough quiet for one lifetime, Nyx, Elias said, his voice steadying. I think I'd like to hear some music for a change. The immediate aftermath was a whirlwind of logistics and lingering fear. For the next 3 days, Elias worked until his vision blurred, using his neurolinker to purge the remaining compliance tags from the building's infrastructure. He slept in 3-hour increments on the memory foam slab in room 4B, which was now constantly filled with neighbors bringing him bowls of soup, light paintings, and news from the capital. The Sovereign Dynamics executives had been detained by the Planetary Council, their luxury yachts impounded, and their resource charters revoked. The corporation wasn't dead, but on Oros Theta, its name was now a curse. On the 4th night, Elias found himself on the balcony of the common room, looking out at the city. The bioluminescent cliffs were glowing with a new intensity, a reflection of the hope that had taken root in the ruins. Braca walked out, 2 mugs of the purple wine in her hands. She handed one to him with a grunt. The lawyer came by today, she said, leaning her massive arms on the railing. The one from Earth, Mr. Sterling. Elias tightened his grip on the mug. And? He wanted to know if you were ready to sign the papers. He said the offer was still good. 20,000 credits and a ticket home. He said he could have you on a shuttle by midnight. Elias took a sip of the wine. It tasted of electric blueberries and a future he hadn't planned for. What did you tell him? Braca let out a sound like a landslide. I didn't tell him anything. I let Quill handle it. She told him that if he didn't leave the sector in 10 minutes, she was going to use his expensive suit as a canvas for her new Revolution series light paint. He left in 5. She turned to look at him, her orange eyes searching his face. Are you going to miss it, Elias? The house with the lawn? The planet where everyone looks like you? Elias looked down at his hands, which were still stained with the biogrease of 1,000 alien machines. He thought of the quiet life he had almost traded his soul for. I spent my whole life trying to fit into a world that only wanted my productivity, Braca, Elias said softly. I moved 40 light years to find a place where I was allowed to be a person. I think it would be a waste of a good warp jump to go back now. Braca slapped him on the back, nearly sending him over the railing. Good, Because the ventilation in Sector 7 is a disaster, and you're the only gearhead we trust to touch the wires. As the warrior stomped back inside, Ilias stayed on the balcony. He felt the resonance of the building, a low, steady hum of lives finally allowed to be loud. He realized that he wasn't a cog anymore. He was an anchor. And for a man who had been drifting for 34 years, it was the most terrifying, beautiful feeling in the galaxy. 6 months had passed since the night the sky over Oros Theta turned into a rainbow of corporate feedback. The Gilded Hive was no longer a residential unit. It had been officially renamed the Resonance Outpost, a self-governed sanctuary for the displaced and the empathically gifted. The gray, sterile panels of the exterior had been completely covered in murals. Quill and her team had spent months painting the history of their struggle. Vibrant, swirling scenes of obsidian warriors, four-armed artists, and a single, slightly scruffy human engineer holding a glowing crystal. Elias Thorne stood in the center of the redesigned lobby, which was now a bustling marketplace of ideas and exotic trade. The pools of light were filled with children learning to swim, and the floating vegetation had grown into a lush, bioluminescent jungle that reached all the way to the vaulted ceiling. He was wearing a jumpsuit made of Xylari silk, tough, breathable, and shifting in color from deep blue to silver. On his hip was a new neurolinker, custom-built by himself and Quill, capable of repairing both machines and the delicate neural shrouds the refugees used to manage their sensitivity. "The shipment of Earth seeds just arrived, Elias," Nyx called out, her gills fluttering with excitement. She was now the outpost's primary agronomist. "We have tomatoes, actual biological tomatoes." "Don't let Braca near them," Elias laughed. "She'll try to use them as stress balls." He walked toward the lift tube, stopping every few meters to shake a hand, pat a shoulder, or offer a quick technical fix for a neighbor's datapad. He wasn't a celebrity. He was just Elias, the guy who lived in 4B, the guy who chose to stay. He reached the 4th floor and walked past the common room, where the smell of roasting spices and the sound of a glass flute drifted into the hallway. He reached his door and stopped. He pulled out his datapad and hit the record button. "Hey, Sarah," he said, his voice warm and grounded. "I know I haven't sent a message in a few weeks. The new atmospheric grid took up most of my time. We're finally getting the humidity levels right for the Xylari districts." He paused, looking at his reflection in the dark screen of the pad. He looked older, certainly. There were new lines around his eyes and a faint scar on his temple from the neural bridge. But the hollow, haunted look he had carried from Earth was gone. "I got your last message about the house," Elias continued. "The one Mom wanted me to look at in the suburbs. Tell her thank you, but I've already got a home. It's loud and it smells like ozone, and the neighbors have way too many opinions about my cooking. But for the first time in my life, I don't feel like I'm waiting for a bill to come due." He looked at the wall shared with room 4A. "I used to think that the goal of life was to minimize the friction, to be efficient, to be quiet. I thought if I didn't owe anyone anything, I was free. But I was wrong, Sarah. Freedom isn't being alone in a quiet room. Freedom is choosing who you're loud with. It's choosing the people whose burdens you're willing to carry because you know they're carrying yours too." He ended the recording and sent it into the void. It would take 3 days to reach Earth, but he didn't mind the wait. He was no longer a man living in the gap between shuttle launches. The door to 4A opened, and Vesper stepped out. She was wearing a crown of woven silver filaments, her royal status now a symbol of her service to the community rather than a secret she had to hide. Her eyes were bright, the gold flecks spinning with a steady, peaceful rhythm. "The council is waiting for us, Elias," she said, taking his hand. "They want to discuss the new trade agreement with the belt miners." "Give me 10 minutes, Elias said, pulling her close. "I need to fix the light strip in 4C. Braca says it's too cheerful, and it's bothering her afternoon nap." Vesper laughed, a sound that Elias felt in the center of his chest. "You are a strange human, Elias Thorne. You could be a diplomat, a leader, a hero, and yet you still want to fix the light strips." "Someone has to do it," Elias said, kissing her forehead. "And besides, I like the view from the crawl spaces." He let go of her hand and walked down the hall, his tool case clanking against his leg. As he worked on the light strip, his mind drifted back to the journey that had brought him here. I spent 34 years thinking that my life was a series of unpaid bills and broken bridges. On Earth, I was defined by what I lacked: money, a marriage, a future. I thought that by moving to Oros Theta, I was just changing the scenery of my failure. I wanted a quiet life because I was afraid of the noise. I was afraid that if I let anyone in, they would see the mess I had made and ask me to pay for it. But the Gilded Hive didn't want my credits or my pedigree. It wanted my mess. It wanted my loud, clumsy human heart to beat in rhythm with its own. I learned that family isn't something you're born into like a predetermined contract. It's something you build with the scraps of your mistakes and the light of your choices. I realized that my flaws weren't things to be hidden, but the very things that allowed me to connect to others who were just as broken as I was. Looking out at the violet sky now, I don't see a foreign world. I see a home that I helped build, not with bricks and mortar, but with the simple, terrifying act of caring about people I didn't have to care about. I'm not a cog in a machine anymore. I'm a stitch in a tapestry. It's loud, it's complicated, and it's the most expensive thing I've ever owned. But for the first time in my life, I'm not worried about the cost. I'm just grateful I get to be part of the music. Ilias closed the maintenance panel and stepped back, wiping a smear of dust from his jumpsuit. The light strip in Braca's hallway was now a soft, muted amber, a grumpy orange, as Quill called it. He felt a sense of quiet satisfaction, the kind that only comes from a job done for people you love. He looked at the camera, as if he could see through the light years, through the data streams, and into the hearts of everyone still searching for a quiet life. I spent so long running away from the noise of other people, thinking that peace was found in the silence of being alone. But in the end, it was the messy, loud, and inconvenient love of my neighbors that saved me. I wonder, have you ever found yourself building walls to keep out the world, only to realize you've accidentally built a prison? And if you had the chance to tear those walls down, to be loud and vulnerable with the people around you, would you take the risk? What is the noise in your life that you've been avoiding, which might actually be the song you were meant to sing? Elias picked up his tool case and walked toward the common room, the sound of laughter rising to meet him. He didn't look back. He was too busy being home. The violet sky of Oros Theta flared with a sudden, brilliant aurora, painting the stars in the colors of a choice well made.